James Walker stared at the foreclosure notice in his hand. The morning light came through the kitchen window, making the official red stamp seem even more harsh. After 20 years, his family bakery was 3 months from closing forever. The paper trembled in his fingers. He couldn't believe it had come to this. Since his wife Mary passed away last spring, everything had fallen apart. The bills piled up in messy stacks on his desk. Regular customers who once filled the shop each morning now only came once in a while. The heart of Walker's bakery, Mary's warm smile behind the counter, was gone, and with it, James's passion for baking. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the quiet house. Outside, the village of Millfield was waking up. Lights turned on in neighboring cottages. Dogs barked as their owners took them for early walks. Life went on for everyone else. "Dad, I made tea," his daughter Emma said, placing a steaming mug beside him at the kitchen table. The rich smell of black tea filled the air. Emma had started making tea every morning after her mother died. It was her way of taking care of him, at AP. 16, Emma had her mother's kind eyes and stubborn determination. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore her school uniform already, though school wouldn't start for another hour. James forced a smile, quickly sliding the notice under yesterday's newspaper. "Thanks, love." Emma glanced at his hidden hand and the edge of the paper that still showed. "Is it the bakery again?" she asked quietly. "I heard Mrs. Thompson at school saying you might close." James sighed and rubbed his tired eyes. In a small village like Millfield, news travelled faster than the morning train to London. Everyone knew everyone's business. The whole village probably knew about the foreclosure before he did. "Just a rough patch," he said, though they both knew it was worse. Much worse. Emma sat down across from him, her young face serious. "We could put up some flyers, maybe do a special weekend sale. I could help after school." James reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You focus on your studies. The bakery is my worry, not yours." After Emma left for school, James sat alone in the quiet kitchen. The house felt empty without Mary's singing and the radio she always kept on. He missed her laugh, her advice, the way she always knew exactly what to say when things got tough. That night, after a day of few customers and lower sales than he needed, James couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about the bakery. It had been his grandfather's, then his father's, and now his. The little shop on the corner of High Street had been in the Walker family for 4 generations. Every child in Millfield grew up eating Walker bread and treats. How could he be the one to lose it all? The old brick building with its faded blue door had seen 2 world wars, countless celebrations, village changes, and had stood strong through it all. Until now. Until him. Morning came too soon. James dragged himself out of bed when it was still dark. Bakers kept early hours. By 5 in the morning he was at the shop, turning on the lights and heating the ovens. The familiar smells of flour and yeast surrounded him, but brought little comfort. James mixed dough mechanically, his movements lacking their usual care. He forgot the extra pinch of salt his father had taught him always made the difference. He didn't sing to the bread as it rose. The way Mary used to say made it rise better. His heart wasn't in it anymore. The morning passed slowly. Fair few regulars came in, old Mr. Wilson for his daily roll, Mrs. Baker buying bread for her boarding house. They were kind, asked about Emma, but James saw the pity in their eyes. They knew. Just before lunch, as James was considering closing early, the bell above the door jingled. He looked up to see an elderly man he didn't recognize. The stranger wore a neat grey coat and had bright blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Just passing through town," the stranger said with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Smelled your bread from down the street. Reminded me of home." His voice had an accent James couldn't place. Not local, certainly. The man studied the nearly empty shelves with interest. "Not much left today, I'm afraid," James apologized. "The sourdough is fresh, though." "Sourdough is my favorite," the man said, eyes lighting up. James wrapped a loaf in paper, tying it with string the old-fashioned way his father had insisted on. The man paid and then, instead of leaving, took a bite right there in the shop. It wasn't common for customers to eat before leaving, but James didn't mind. The man's eyes widened as he chewed slowly. thoughtfully. A look of pure joy spread across his face. "Young man," he said, though James was well into his 40s, "this is extraordinary, truly extraordinary." For the first time in months, James felt a flicker of pride warming his chest. Something in the man's genuine reaction touched a place inside him that had been cold since Mary died. "My father's recipe," James said quietly, "and his father's before him. You can taste the history," the stranger nodded. "You can taste the care." "You shouldn't give up on something that makes people feel this way," the stranger said before leaving. He tucked the remaining bread carefully into his coat pocket, nodded once more with appreciation, and walked out the door. The little bell jingled as the door closed behind him. The words hung in the empty bakery. James stood still behind the counter, flour dusting his apron, thinking about what the man had said. All day, as he cleaned the bakery and closed up shop, the stranger's words echoed in his mind. That evening, after a quiet dinner of leftover stew, Emma found her father sitting at the kitchen table. The room was dim, lit only by the small lamp above the sink. James was carefully sorting through a wooden box filled with recipe cards. Emma recognized it immediately, her mother's recipe box. "Dad?" she asked softly, not wanting to startle. James looked up, his eyes a little red. In his hands was a card covered in Mary's neat handwriting, her famous cinnamon roll recipe, the one that had won first prize at the county fair 3 years running. "Your mum always said baking was about love, not just flour and butter," James said softly, running his thumb over Mary's handwriting. "I forgot that when she left us." Emma sat beside him at the table. She picked up another recipe card, her mother's chocolate cherry bread that everyone in the village ordered for special occasions. "She also said, 'Walker bread feeds the soul,'" James smiled at the memory. "She did say that, didn't she?" Together they spent hours going through the recipe box. They found all of Mary's special recipes, the ones that had customers lining up outside the bakery on Saturday mornings. There were notes in the margins about how to make each recipe perfect. Add extra vanilla if the weather is damp. Let the dough rise an extra 30 minutes in winter. Little secrets that made Walker baking special. James felt something stir inside him as he read her handwritten notes. It was like hearing Mary's voice again, guiding his hands through the dough. "We should make these again," Emma said, organizing the cards into a neat pile. "People miss Mum's baking." That night James slept better than he had in months. He woke before dawn with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Mary's passing. He got to the bakery early, and alongside his usual bread, he mixed the dough for Mary's famous cinnamon rolls. His hands remembered the movements even after all these months. The familiar smell of cinnamon and brown sugar filled the bakery. By noon, the sweet aroma had drifted out onto the village street, drawing curious villagers who hadn't visited in months. The bell above the door jingled more times than it had. All week, Mrs. Thompson came in just after lunch. She was the head teacher at the village school and had been Mary's closest friend. Her eyes widened when she saw the cinnamon rolls cooling on the rack. "Are those—" she began, not finishing her sentence. James nodded. "Mary's recipe. Mrs. Thompson bought 6 more than she could possibly eat alone. As James wrapped them in paper, she leaned in and whispered, 'Just like Mary used to. Make!'" There were tears in her eyes as she left. For a week, James added one of Mary's recipes each day. On Tuesday, it was her lemon drizzle cake. Wednesday brought cheese and herb bread. Thursday was chocolate cherry loaf. Friday, apple turnovers. Saturday, her special weekend scones with orange zest. Old customers returned. Bringing neighbors and friends who had heard Walker's bakery was making Mary's recipes again. The shop was busier than it had been in months. It wasn't enough to save the bakery yet. The foreclosure notice still sat in his desk drawer at home, but it was a start. Then disaster struck. On Sunday evening, as James was preparing dough for Monday morning, the ancient oven, the very heart of Walker's bakery, made a terrible grinding noise and stopped working completely. No amount of tinkering could bring it back to life. The repairman came first thing Monday morning, shook his head and gave James the bad news. "This old girl's given all she has to give. You'll need a new one. Commercial bakery oven, that'll cost thousands." Thousands of pounds. Money James simply didn't have. "We'll figure something out," Emma insisted that night over a dinner of cold sandwiches. Her young face was determined in the kitchen light. James shook his head, feeling defeated once again. "Some things aren't meant to be saved, love." That night, after her father went to bed, Emma secretly made phone calls. She called Mrs. Thompson first, then Mr. Wilson, then the Bakers and the Clarks. She called everyone in her mother's old address book. By morning, as James walked to the bakery to put up a closed until further notice sign, he was surprised to see a crowd gathered outside. Neighbors, customers, and even Mayor Brown stood in the chilly morning air. There must have been 30 people at least. "What's all this?" James asked, confused by the gathering. Tom Lewis, the village butcher, and James's oldest friend since primary school days, stepped forward. He had a white envelope in his hand. "Emma told us about the oven," Tom said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Walker's isn't just your bakery, James, it's Millfield's bakery." "We've taken up a collection," Tom continued, handing James an envelope. It was stuffed full of cash and checks. "It's not charity, it's an investment in our community." James stared at the envelope in his hands, not quite believing what he was seeing. The morning sun caught on something shiny, and he noticed many people in the crowd wearing Walker's bakery pins, small bread loaf shapes that Mary had made years ago for their 10th anniversary in business. With shaking hands, James opened the envelope and began counting. 20-pound notes, 10-pound notes, even bags of coins with children's names written on them. The amount grew and grew as he counted. Nearly enough for a new oven. His throat felt tight. "I can't accept," he began, trying to hand the envelope back to Tom. "You can and you will," interrupted Mrs. Thompson, stepping forward from the crowd. Her grey hair was neatly pinned back and she wore her best Sunday coat despite it being Monday morning. "My William proposed to me over your father's apple tarts 28 years ago. My children grew up on Walker bread, and when Mary died, your kindness kept this town going. Those meals you sent over to the elderly, the bread you donated to the school, it's our turn now." Others in the crowd nodded. Old Mr. Wilson called out, "4 generations of Wilsons have eaten Walker bread for breakfast. We're not about to stop." "Now," James looked at the faces around him, people he'd known his entire life, the postman who delivered his mail every day, the librarian who had helped Emma find books since she was little, the farmers who supplied his flour. For the first time since Mary's passing, he didn't feel alone. "I don't know what to say," James managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Say, you'll bake us some cinnamon rolls by the weekend," called someone from the back, and everyone laughed. The new oven arrived the following week. It was bigger and more efficient than the old one. James spent a day just learning all its settings. When it was installed and working, he hung a small wooden plaque beside it. Emma had helped him carve and paint the words, "Community rises together." With the new oven came fresh energy. The bakery smelled of good things baking from early morning until closing time. Emma began helping after school, learning her grandmother's techniques from the recipe cards. James noticed right away that she had Mary's touch with pastry, knowing just how gently to handle the dough. "You're a natural, love," he told her one afternoon as she perfectly crimped the edges of apple turnovers. She smiled, flour dusting her cheeks, looking so much like Mary that it made his heart ache in a way that was both sad and happy. Word spread beyond Millfield. A reporter from the county paper came to write a story about the village that saved its bakery. She took photos of James and Emma in their aprons and of the new oven with its plaque. The story ran with the headline, "Rising Together, How One Village Saved Its Heart." After the newspaper story, customers began driving from neighboring towns just to try Walker's baking. Weekends became so busy that James had to ask Tom's son, Peter, to help at the counter while he and Emma baked. But as business improved, James noticed something troubling. The big supermarket at the edge of town had launched a bakery section with cheap, mass-produced goods. Their bread cost half what James charged, though it wasn't nearly as good. One Tuesday morning, James noticed Mrs. Clark, who had always bought his bread, walking past the bakery with a supermarket bag. She looked away quickly when she saw him in the window. James understood. Her husband had lost his job at the factory last month. Some Millfield residents, struggling with tight budgets, couldn't afford to support the local bakery despite wanting to. That evening, as James went over the books at the kitchen table, Emma sat down across from him with a serious look on her. "Young face, we need to do something different," she said, twisting a strand of hair around her finger the way she always did when thinking hard. "Something nobody else offers, something the supermarket can't do." James nodded. The bakery was doing better, but the supermarket was still a threat. And he hated the thought of families like the Clarks having to choose between good bread and paying their bills. That night, James couldn't sleep again, but this time, his mind raced with possibilities rather than worries. He remembered how the village had come together for him. He thought about Mary and what she would have done. By morning, as the first light came through his bedroom window, he had an idea. He hurried downstairs, where Emma was already up making tea. "Community Bread Day," he announced, accepting the mug she handed him. "Every Thursday, pay what you can." Emma's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Exactly that," James said, feeling excited for the first time in months. "On Thursdays, people pay whatever they can afford for bread. If they can pay full price, wonderful. If they can only pay half or nothing at all some weeks, that's fine too." "But how will we make money?" Emma asked, practical as always. "Those who can afford to might pay extra, knowing they're helping neighbors," James said. "And even if we just break even on Thursdays, we'll be doing what the bakery is meant to do, feeding our community." Emma looked concerned. Her forehead wrinkled as she set down her tea mug. "Dad, we can barely cover costs as it is. The new oven payments, the bills." James reached across the table and squeezed her hand. A memory of Mary flashed in his mind. Her standing in the bakery, flour on her cheeks, explaining to a young Emma why they sometimes gave free bread to old Mrs. Wilson. "Your mother always said bread is love made visible," James replied, his voice soft but sure. "If we bake with love, the rest will follow." Emma didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Okay, Dad, let's try it." They put a small sign in the window. "Community Bread Day, every Thursday, pay what you can." James wasn't sure if anyone would notice or care. The first Thursday was complete chaos. James prepared double his usual amount, thinking that would be plenty. He was wrong. Word spread through Millfield like wildfire. By 10 in the morning, there was a line out the door. By noon, every loaf, roll, and pastry was gone. Some customers paid full price, dropping extra coins in the till with a wink. Some paid what they could, a handful of change for a loaf that normally cost £3. Others who couldn't pay anything that week promised to pay forward the kindness when times were better. Mrs. Clark came in near closing time, looking nervous. "Is there anything left?" she asked quietly. James had saved a loaf of sourdough behind, the counter just in case. "Just for you," he said, wrapping it up. When she tried to hand him some coins, he shook his head. "Your husband helped fix my roof last summer and wouldn't take payment. This makes us even." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, James. Things will get better soon." The following week, James knew they needed more help. He recruited Emma and Tom's son Oliver to help on Thursdays. Oliver was 19 and strong, perfect for handling the heavy bags of flour and moving trays of bread. They baked through Wednesday night to meet the HFY demand, taking turns napping on the old couch in the back room. By morning, the bakery shelves were full. The smell of fresh bread filled the whole street. Community Bread Day quickly became even more popular. People from other villages began to come. James worried they wouldn't have enough for Millfield residents, but somehow it always worked out. Those who could afford it often paid double, saying they wanted to keep the bread flowing. As autumn turned to winter, Community Bread Day became Millfield's most beloved tradition. Every Thursday the bakery was more than a shop. It was the heart of the village. People didn't just come for bread, they came to connect, to share news, to be part of something good. The bakery didn't make much profit those days. Sometimes they barely broke even. But James slept better at night, knowing no one in his village went without fresh bread. Mary would have been proud. The foreclosure notice, once so threatening, was now tucked away in a drawer. They weren't rich, but they were making enough to keep going. Each month, James made his payments on time. The Christmas season approached, always the bakery's busiest time. People wanted special breads and sweet treats for their holiday tables. James worried they couldn't manage the volume with just him and Emma, even with Oliver helping part-time. "We'll manage," Emma insisted, but James saw the tiredness in her young eyes. She was working too hard, trying to keep up with school and the bakery. On December 1st, as James was mixing dough for the morning, the bell above the door jingled. He looked up, ready to say they weren't open yet, when a familiar face appeared. It was Robert Walker, James's younger brother, who had left Millfield 15 years ago to become a chef in London. He looked older, of course, his dark hair now, flecked with grey, but his eyes were the same. Walker eyes, their father always said. "Emma called," Robert explained awkwardly, setting down his suitcase just inside the door. "Said you might need help for the holiday rush. I've got 3 weeks of holiday time from the restaurant." James stared at his brother, shocked. They hadn't spoken in years, not properly. Christmas cards, the occasional brief phone call on birthdays, that was all. The brothers had parted on bad terms when Robert chose a different path than the family bakery. Their father had been hurt, and James had taken his side. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. Now, as they stood face to face in the warm bakery, James thought of Mary. She had always told him life was too short for grudges. "Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself," she would say. In his mind's eye, he saw Mary's gentle smile. Her forgiveness. "The spare room's still yours," James said simply. "Hasn't changed much." Relief washed over Robert's face. He picked up his suitcase. "I'll just put this upstairs then, and then maybe you can show me what needs doing." With Robert's help, the bakery thrived through December. His years in professional kitchens had taught him efficiency and new techniques. James stuck to the traditional methods, the ones passed down through generations of Walkers. Together, they were better than either alone. They created new holiday specialties: cranberry orange bread, gingerbread scones, chocolate mint rolls that sold out daily. The bakery was busier than it had been in years. Emma seemed happier too, watching her father and uncle work side by side, the tension between them slowly melting away. On Christmas Eve, as they prepared for their busiest day of the year, Robert was unusually quiet. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the thump of dough on the counter and the hum of the oven. Finally, as he was shaping dinner rolls, Robert cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, Jamie," he said, using James's childhood nickname. "My restaurant job isn't what I hoped it would be. London's too busy, too impersonal. If you needed a partner here..." By spring, Walker's bakery had transformed completely. The winter snow melted away, and with it, the last traces of the old, struggling shop. The brothers worked side by side every day, their old arguments forgotten. Together, they renovated the space, knocking down the wall between the bakery and the empty shop next door that had once been the village cobbler. In this new space, they added a small cafe where customers could sit at round wooden tables and enjoy Mary's pastries with proper tea served in blue china cups. The walls were painted a warm yellow, and photographs of Millfield through the years hung in simple frames. Many showed the bakery and the Walker family across generations. Emma, now 17 and in her final year of school, designed a new logo for the shop. It combined old and new, a traditional bread loaf with modern lettering that read, "Walker & Walker, Eastern 1923, Reimagined 2025. They painted it carefully on the front window and printed it on their new paper bags. The foreclosure notice that had once caused James so much worry was now framed behind the counter. Robert had suggested it. "To remind us how close we came to losing everything," he said, "and how the village saved us." Community Bread Day continued every Thursday, but now they could serve many more people. No one in Millfield went without fresh bread, no matter their circumstances. The supermarket's bakery section had shrunk, unable to compete with the warmth and community of Walkers. Emma still helped after school and talked about studying business at university. "I want to learn how to make places like this thrive," she told her father. "Places that bring people together." One bright morning in May, exactly 1 year after the stranger first tasted James's sourdough, the bell above the door jingled. James looked up from where he was arranging fresh scones and saw the same elderly man with bright blue eyes walking into the shop. He wore the same neat grey coat, despite the warm spring day. "I was passing through again," he said, smiling as he looked around at the transformed bakery. "Heard this place was doing remarkable things. The cafe tables were full of customers enjoying late breakfast. The sound of conversation and clinking teacups filled the air. Robert was at the counter, wrapping bread for Mrs. Thompson. Emma was serving tea to Mr. Wilson, who came every day now for his morning roll and conversation. "Things have changed a bit since your last visit," James said, wiping flour from his hands onto his apron. The man nodded, his eyes taking in every detail. "For the better, it seems. Quite a community you've built." James offered him fresh sourdough bread, the same kind he'd bought a year ago, but the man shook his head. "I'd like to try that cinnamon roll everyone's talking about. I heard about them as far as the next village." James wrapped one of Mary's famous cinnamon rolls in paper. The man paid, and then took a bite right there in the shop, just as he had done with the sourdough a year before. As the man took his first bite, his eyes closed in appreciation. A look of pure joy spread across his face, followed by something deeper, a flash of memory, perhaps. "This reminds me of something my mother made, long ago," he said softly. "In a kitchen much like this one." "My wife's recipe," James explained, feeling the familiar mix of sadness and pride that came whenever he spoke of Mary. She believed food should make memories. She was right, the man said, finishing the roll slowly, savoring each bite. "And you've honored her beautifully." The man stayed for tea, sitting at a corner table and watching the life of the village play out before him. Children coming in after school for cookies, old friends meeting for afternoon tea, young couples sharing pastries and making plans. When he finally left, he shook James's hand warmly. "I'll be back next time I'm passing through," he promised. Later, as the day ended and James locked up the shop, he paused outside to watch the sunset over Millfield. The village was quiet now, with just a few lights turning on in cottages as evening fell. The church bell rang 6 times clear in the evening air. The year had brought tremendous pain but also unexpected joy. First losing Mary, then nearly losing the bakery, then finding a new way forward with Robert and Emma by his side. The bakery wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. More importantly, it had become what Mary had always envisioned, a heart for Ray. The community. Back inside, James found Emma looking at her mother's portrait that hung near the cafe entrance. Mary's kind eyes and warm smile looked out at them, flower on her cheek, just as they remembered her. That night, James added a new, small wooden plaque beside Mary's portrait. "The greatest ingredient is always love." Emma slipped her hand into his as they stood looking at it. "Mum would be proud," she said, her voice steady though her eyes shone with tears. James nodded, feeling Mary's presence in the warmth of the bakery, in Emma's smile, in Robert's laughter from the kitchen where he was preparing dough for tomorrow. In the dough they would shape together when morning came. Some losses could never be replaced, but some hearts, like good bread, could rise again with the right care and patience. The bakery that had been saved by love now gave that love back to Millfield, one loaf at a time. The end.